Hi, everyone. I'm just going to give it a few more minutes for people to be filtering in, although I think people will be filtering in maybe for a little bit, but we'll get going in just a minute. Happy, beautiful Wednesday. All right, Sue, it looks like we have a good number of the registered participants here, right? So maybe we'll get started. Yeah, okay. Okay, hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. This is the AIA accredited program that we've titled Demystifying Green Certifications, Guidance for Architects Seeking the Best Fit. The faces that you see on this slide are those that are going to be discussing each kind of area of expertise or each different certification that we're focusing on today. And we will be letting Beth Eckenrode in the center there take us through kind of an overview of all of it, and then we're going to get into a Q&A. So we'll ask that you guys all come, if you have questions, please feel free to bring them up, either putting them in the chat or talking, however you like to do it, raising your hand. But we do want to make this be we want to make this be useful for you. So if you have questions, we're here to answer them. Okay, so this is an accredited course with AIA. You'll get credits if you've given your AIA number. I think you can get certificate of completion from the AIA PV office. If you need that certificate, reach out to Pam. And it's 1.5 HSW. Okay, the course description, you've all probably had a chance to kind of read it. We developed this course because we were, probably like you, really interested in getting a firmer understanding of the different credentials out there. I think probably like many of you started with LEED 15, 20 years ago. And since then it has just grown so exponentially. So where do we go from here? Should we be well accredited? Should we be passive house? Should we be Fitwel Living Building Challenge? So we're going to kind of get into each one of those and see which one fits for each of us, which one's best to pursue for your project type, for your practice type. So the objectives are, we are looking specifically at passive house certifications with both PHIUS and PHI. We're looking at Fitwel, Living Building Challenge, and Reset. We're going to discuss how each of these programs enhance an architect's ability to design sustainably. We're going to highlight key areas of focus for each one and how they might actually complement each other. You might want to actually have pieces from more than one per project. And then compare them to each other to determine which credential will provide the most benefit to architects and your projects. And then again, as I mentioned, we're here to explore. So we're going to do Q&A, which program might be best for you and your specific project and sustainability needs. So with that, I'm going to turn the screen over to Beth Eckenrode, and she's going to give us the overview of today's topic.
Great. Thank you. Let me try to get to my, can I get a thumbs up, Deborah, if you see the opening slide? Great, everybody, thanks for having us. So we have a really esteemed panel here today, so we're going to try to get to them as fast as possible, but they're going to take us down a little bit of a clip deeper into the individual standards that each one will be representing. What I'm going to do is set the tone and set the stage for all of them, and just a way to talk about the differences. So why are there so many? How do they individually come at their standard? And what is distinctive or unique about each? So to do that, do that. Let me see. Can you see the next slide? No? There, now you can see the next slide. Okay, so as Oros Group, we're out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we look through a different type of lens. So just really quickly, so you know kind of where we're coming at, we sit at the intersection of building science and data science. So we go as deep on the built environment from an operating standpoint and how to use data and how to drive to measurement and verification. So we spend as much time in that world as we do on the building science side. We're certified in everything because basically we don't want to be the hammer that looks for the nail. So we're really, really broad on the building science side, but what is unique is that we also look for measurement and verification. How do we convince owners that they know that they got what they paid for? We're often asked the question around what is sustainable development, and there are primarily two answers. One is an academic answer, which is on the left. The one on the right is a little bit more of a, it begins to inform us on how do we get to sustainable development, and those are the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Beth, excuse me, you're not on slide 3. The screen's on slide 2. Yep, there you go. See it. Yep, we're good. Thanks.
Okay. It's flipping on my end, which was the problem I was having earlier. So thank you. I appreciate that, Craig. So the left is kind of an academic answer. The right here, as you can see, there are some threads that thread across the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Those begin to inform us as practitioners of what's actionable. And so for us, it really comes down to when you look at standards and you think about sustainability, what can we drive in terms of progress and improvements and performance? Can you see the history of sustainability? Okay, great. So as we go through kind of the beginnings of where we started with sustainability, early was all around conservatism. And we've evolved. LEED was very much involved in setting the standards around what it means to be sustainable. We're not talking about LEED today because they've been around so long and there's such a deep knowledge of LEED that we're going to click a little bit deeper. We're going to spend our time on the certifications and the standards that people maybe don't know as much about. But if you look at where we are today, depending on where you live, we've already seen significant performance accountability. New York, even Pittsburgh, like we're starting to see regulations around what building and building owners are allowed to do and what they're expected to do in terms of energy and carbon over the next decade or two. So when you think about where we're headed and whether or not we're taken there by force or by choice, you start to have to think about goals. And so when we think about goals, we set metrics, and we set metrics around a lot of different types of criteria. And we do that because what we have found is that if you can boil a goal into a metric, now all of a sudden you can align engineers with architects, with commissioning agents, with construction experts, and that's where you get some real out-of-the-box thinking. So our owner's project requirements is only numbers. That's how we build all of them. So when we start to click into what are the standards and certifications, I love this picture because this is how we think about it. It's a buffet. It's a buffet of a lot of different options and choices. And what choices you make should be driven by what your goals are, what the owner wants to achieve, what constitutes performance, success when the building is operating. And that's then how you begin to choose which pieces off the buffet you'd like to take. I'm going to start with Living Building Challenge because it's the broadest of all of the standards we're going to review today. And Susan's going to go through a lot more detail with us, but I'm going to talk you through, at least at a high level, what defines Living Building Challenge. And Living Building is based on ecological research, which is really around the idea of how do human beings interact with nature. It's got a very unique lens that it looks through. So all of the research that defines the different labels, the different certifications, the different challenges, all come through the lens of the relationship between human beings and nature. There are steps you can take. What's kind of distinctive and unique about Living Building is you don't have to eat the whole enchilada if you don't want to. There are ways where you can look at a petal certification. You can even carve off zero carbon and go after a zero carbon certification. So Living Building, despite being very broad and in many cases the most difficult to achieve full certification, it tries to be a little bit more approachable depending on how you what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve. There are petals in living building. There are 7 petals, very much like a flower. Living building is built around imagery. And the image with living building in terms of the petals is a flower, and there are 7 petals. And those 7 petals form these different imperatives. Each one of these imperatives is from that petal that was in the box before. And so you can pick it off and target different elements of living building against your goals. Well building is really designed around people. So well building comes through its standard from a medical research standpoint. And when we talk about medical research, it's more about the relationship that our body is, how our body's affected system by system, cardiovascular to digestive to endocrine. How are our systems impacted by the building? And it's a one-to-one relationship. Myself, my personal body, and how does it perform its best and be the most healthy in the environment that it's in the built environment. Well building has 10 concepts with over 100 features. What's distinctive about well is there are preconditions and optimizations. If you miss a precondition, you miss well. So there are consequences to the choices you make early in design. And well also has a new program built around health and safety. So this came out of COVID, right? So this is more of a, how do I ensure that owners want, or building occupants want to come back into my building and feel like I'm controlling what I can control. It's very much based on policies and protocols and procedures. They also recently came out with a beta program around performance. And this is the well performance rating. It is essentially 30 possible features. You have to get 21, at least 21 out of the 30 features, but it's entirely based on performance. So instead of submitting what you intend to do, you submit, once the building's up and operating, you submit what you've done and what the performance is in those categories. So it's all around performance measurement and verification. Fitwel developed its standard looking through a public health lens. And what's unique about that is Fitwel focuses on chronic disease prevention. And so Fitwel has a series of impact categories. They don't have any prerequisites like well. Largely, it's why Fitwel is considered a little bit more approachable version of well, because it kind of casts the same net. It goes as broad, but it comes at it differently. It's looking at public health. So how do we interact amongst each other? How do we tackle chronic disease, not including just things like cardiovascular disease and hypertension, but mental illness and things where, you know, you want people to be social, you want people to be moving. How do you keep people moving? Fitwel is very much built around the idea that we need to drive public health. Fitwel also came out with a standard around, to address COVID, around the Fitwel viral response. And it too is based on things that you can control, policies, procedures. How do you make sure that people, when they come back into the building, they feel like you've done everything that you can do to make that environment healthy? Passive House is a different certification altogether. So Passive House is one of 2 standards in addition to well performance rating that says you get certified if you hit a performance level. And Passive House basically says, you know, we think we can reduce energy consumption in a building as much as 75 to 80%. Passive House started with the idea that you should never breathe the same air twice. So what a lot of people think is that Passive House started to address energy. It didn't. It's not its genesis. It started to address hygienic ventilation. Because Passive House came out, when Wolfgang Feist developed the first Passive House standard, it came out at a time when energy was critical. And so what people realized is that you could reduce so much energy use in a home or in a building that it became known as an energy standard, when in fact, it really enables energy and indoor environmental quality, or IAQ. Passive House drives this concept around natural order sustainability. It drives the notion that you want to reduce consumption first. if you reduce consumption first by tightening your envelope and creating a high performance envelope, now you've given yourself permission to reduce the size of your active systems. Once you reduce the size of your active systems, now the size of whatever renewable solution you reach to is smaller. So we call it the natural order of sustainability because it makes so much sense, the order of operations that you take in order to get to a building's theoretical optimum level of performance. And you get some incredible results. And while Passive House is just starting to take root, and the building science around Passive House is just beginning to take root here in the US, it's been around for a while in Europe. And so there's a tremendous amount of data that validates that you can get to really low energy levels of energy, irrespective of climate zone. You can get to really low levels of energy by pursuing Passive House strategies. And it's essentially 5 basic strategies, that 4 of which are really driven around the envelope, and one that says, you know, you should be able to get to a much more efficient level of heat recovery ventilation. We often say that Passive House is to energy what Reset Air is to indoor air quality. So I'll transition into Reset Air by saying that, you know, you have to control your environment. Not only, you know, a building's primary objective is to keep what's outside the building out. And so when you think about only letting certain things in and only letting certain things out, that's what begins to define how you control for both energy and indoor air quality. It is all about control. So Reset is one of the more comprehensive standards. And again, it's also just kind of coming to the US. It started in China. It was created in China, where, of course, the outdoor air quality is the worst in the world. The idea being, if we can, you know, keep buildings healthy in China, we can keep buildings healthy anywhere. And so it starts with a standard around the monitor. So it doesn't tolerate substandard monitors to assess indoor air quality. It basically says you have to have a certain amount of quality in those monitors, and then they have to be placed a certain way. The installation and standard of those has to be done by a Reset accredited professional. And then the data has to be handled in a certain way. So the whole idea being, people should be entitled to know what the indoor air quality is in the buildings that they live or work or learn or worship. And that should be available. So they're kind of the first standard that came out and said data should be democratized. It should be available. And so it took a very holistic approach to driving indoor air quality. And from a standard standpoint, in terms of metrics, it is the most aggressive. So this high performance standard in Reset Air, in terms of PM 2.5, which is particulate matter, the size of particulate that can get inside the lungs and trigger things like asthma, that's 2.5. This total volatile organic compounds and CO2, these are the most aggressive level of metrics that any standard has when it comes to indoor air quality. And then this just kind of explains how Passive House and Reset Air kind of enable each other. So Passive House sets the stage for how you build a building to be really high quality. And Reset Air says, you know, we decouple buildings' performance from that of indoor occupied spaces. So essentially saying you can start to think about these things differently. Remember, back in the day, you had to trade one off for the other. If you wanted energy, you had to give up indoor air quality. If you wanted indoor air quality, you had to give up energy. This basically says you don't, because you can decouple and think about strategies for each one differently. And then there's kind of one more layer. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about it, but there's one more layer of consideration, and that's carbon. And while each standard is trying to figure out how it addresses carbon, right? I mentioned earlier, a living building has a zero carbon certification. Well buildings starting to focus more on zero carbon. This is the way to think about it. If you know, all we do is try to offset buildings with renewable energy to reduce operating carbon, we'll never get to true zero carbon, because we have to deal with embodied carbon. We have to deal with how we build buildings and what we bring into buildings in terms of materials and construction. And there's the whole piece of electrifying everything. So when we add in this layer of decarbonization, so what's the natural order of decarbonization? This is the order of operations. This is how you think about getting to zero carbon in the most organic and holistic way. And then I put together this, and it seemed to have traction with a lot of people that we presented it to. So I offer this up as something that you'll have when you receive the slides. It's just a little bit of an overview of decarbonization, the different tools that are available, what the application type is, the price of those tools, what it integrates with, and then what type of the certificates that we talked about or the standards we talked about are supported by it. And then the standard itself in terms of, does it have a zero certification approach and what the target is? And then if you're looking at life cycle, what scopes does it deal with? So this is just kind of a bit of a cheat sheet to help guide you on how to think about carbon. And then this is just a little bit of an overview, kind of sets the stage for this conversation we're going to have with our experts. But this is the whole idea around this is, what do the standards cover? And you can be as surgical and as specific as you want to be, and you can be as broad and as kind of comprehensive as you want to be. And so this is how we think about each one of the standards and where it fits, and what kind of each standard is made up of. For us in our practice, we think a lot about passive house and reset areas, kind of the antes to the game. And we'll talk a little bit in a minute about costs, but you should be able to get to really low energy consumption and really healthy indoor air quality without having to pay a premium. It shouldn't cost any more to build that type of quality building than it does to build a code-based building. And what you choose to do at what time, this is the McLeamy curve, what you choose to do at what time is what owners need to understand. Owners need to understand that making decisions here doesn't cost what it does to make changes here. And so we show this McLeamy curve almost everywhere we go with owners to help them understand why they need to prioritize these decisions early. It's also why we make such a big deal out of developing a metrics-based owners project requirements. It sets the stage for what the entire team will be focused on, and then what owners are going to measure. What are they going to hold people accountable to in operations? And one of the things that your organizers, that AIA Potomac Valley asked us to do, is to bring together kind of a summary of what do programs cost? What are the program costs? What are the construction premiums, if there are any? What is the consulting fees? And so these are our sources down here. And this data is only as good as what we can find available and the projects that are sourced. So it's not foolproof, but it's kind of thumb in the air guidance on how to think about the differences of each program cost, what the construction premiums are, and then what the consulting costs might be. Also, we took a shot at degree of difficulty in order to just give you a sense of what's closer in. If you wanted to start a little nearer in before shooting for a full-blown living building, full certification project, there are ways to do that, even within the living building program. So I'm going to move over into our panel, and with that backdrop and that general explanation of kind of what the main standards are and what they cover, I'm going to move over into our panelists, and I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves and give you an idea of their background. Susan, let's start with you. Susan Block from the Living Building Challenge Collaborative.
Hi, I'm Susan Block. I am an architect in the DC area. I started about, I'm going to say 11 years ago. There were a bunch of ambassadors that were going around giving presentations, and I sort of put my arms around everybody and said, let's meet. And then we started meeting and we listed the buildings. We started planning tours. Then we actually got to work on a house. We did a competition, and that's my involvement in the Living Building Challenge. So, and I'm currently an LFA, which is a Living Future accredited, which is like a lead AP for Living Future.
That's great. Thanks, Susan. Matt Fine?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Matt Fine with Peabody Fine Architects. We're a firm who specialize in passive house or zero energy design. My background is I was trained in the PHIUS standard back in 2010 when I had a project that came to me from DC Habitat for Humanity. They were reaching pretty far out of their comfort zone, and they were looking for an architect who really kind of had the same ethics in terms of public welfare and kind of doing something new and responsible for the earth. I joined David Peabody in 2016. I brought my affordable multifamily experience to kind of his custom high performance home practice. And we're trying to span really the whole gamut of what responsible housing can do for folks. Clearly, we have an affordability issue these days. That is a double-edged challenge for us right now in instituting these other certifications. But as a baseline, when we have our first conversation with clients, the mission is passive house or zero energy design. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. Craig Stevenson from Orals Group.
Hi, everybody. Craig Stevenson. I'm happy to be here. I'm looking forward to the Q&A with this group. So my background is I spent 30 years on the construction side of the fence, doing pretty much everything you can think of, from project management through operations. And about 8 years ago, Beth, my business partner, and I started to create a technology where we can merge simulation dynamically with trended data. Once we did that, we started Orals Group about 6 years ago, and that's when Beth says we work with building science and closing the gap with building science and data science to connect design and construction operations. That's really what we do. Our superpower is in simulation. We do that all day long, and we do it well, and we want to operationalize that model and use it during the 75-year life cycle of a building. I'm certified in pretty much every sustainable certification program. I think there's 7 or 8 that I have, but today I'll be talking about Reset Air and well building, and happy to join you.
Great. And Matthew Balkin from Torty Gallis.
Yes, that's right. I'm with Torty Gallis and Partners here in DC, formerly of Silver Spring, Maryland, and we're well known in the multifamily and mixed use realms, both here and nationally. Prior to this, I was up in Connecticut doing high-end residential for 4 years. Now had about 6 years at Torty Gallis, and it was in about 2018, 2019 here at Torty Gallis that a group of us started to get interested in healthy building and how we could really bring that to our practice as a next step beyond the sort of basis that LEED had set that we're all very familiar with now. And so in January of 2019, I became a Fitwel ambassador, and then followed that up with a WELL AP in August of 2020. And we've just wrapped up submitting the documentation to have our new office space here in DC as a Fitwel commercial interior.
That's great. So I'm gonna scoot ahead to Susan, to your first slide. If you could click another level deeper on living building and how we think about living building in terms of the types of projects you've seen. And I know you have one really special case study you want to talk about too.
So yeah, this slide shows the number of projects in the world that are registered under Living Building Challenge. So there's 784 buildings currently registered, and there's only 163 buildings that are certified. So if you put things in perspective, it's a challenge to say the least. It's very aspirational, inspirational. But you can see that a range of locations on this map. Now I think there's a separate Australian certification system under the Living Future Institute, but there's also a European registration or certification system. So you can see there's projects all over the world, but just very few that have reached the actual certification.
Hey,
some
Susan, let me ask you a follow-up question on that. So what do you
Okay.
think, the biggest hurdle is for projects that become registered and that pathway to certification? Like, what do you see are kind of some of the major challenges?
Well, the one of the differences between living building and other rating systems is there has to be a year of proven net zero energy and proven net zero water. So I know that some of the projects, it takes them a little bit more than a year to get through that, to work out the bugs. And let's see, I mean, we have the red list. We know that certain materials can't be in your project, so that I guess it's one of the hurdles, but it's also one of the things that I love the most about being in a living building. You can, it just feels different, so what else is, where you gonna, so one of the things that
I was just going to ask you to maybe talk about what are, as living building has progressed and it's created different options for certification. Have you seen more interest moving into maybe a pedal certification or the zero carbon certification? What do you see as trends?
Yeah, when people try for the full certification, a lot of times they will only get, a few of the pedals, and so that is where it is the pedal certification is sort of a lesser, not fully certified, but still meets so many of the requirements that it's earned its pedals certification. Okay, and so when I talked about earlier, one of the projects we got to work on as a collaborative was this Ed Gaddy's house. Ed Gaddy is a rocket scientist, worked for NASA, was retiring and wanted to sort of leave a legacy home. And so this is his actual home, and it actually achieved Passive House, Lead for Homes, as well as living building pedal certification. So it really went all out. What I can say about the project, sorry. Oh, you're gonna go to the link?
I'm going to
That's an active.
Yeah, I'm going to drop it in the, no, I'm going to drop it in the chat.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, one of the things that they did, they used his previously existing home foundation for the solar array to sit on. They did things. They have had parties where people were planting and harvesting their crops, since one of the qualifications of living buildings is to have grow things on your property. And when I went on my tour for, it was at Greenbuild in 2015, they had a presentation in there about food, and I came away pescatarian. So, I mean, I learned a lot just by touring the house. And what else can I say? Okay, I'll say that we're really excited. May 3rd to 5th of 2023, the Living Future, they call it the Unconference, but it is coming to DC at the Ronald Reagan Building, and we're real excited, and we're just starting to get planning. So if you want to help plan or volunteer or have just ideas of where we can have events and speakers, there's also an application for presenting that's going around. If you need anything, you can ask me. And yeah, we're really excited. That has been for 10 years. Usually alternates between Seattle and Portland, and this year they said we're coming to DC, so we're all excited.
That's great. So when it comes to a living building project, is it mostly led by architects, or are the owners driving the choice of a living building certification?
This one was driven by Ed. He worked with Mish Booz was the architect, and he worked with Peter Dew on the consulting. That's a great question. The Bullet Center was client driven. Yeah, I think it must, the knowledge and education, we've been trying to sort of spread it around. But I do think it is client driven, but yeah, and there's,
given the aspirations, given what it takes to commit to,
yeah,
assume the client's got to be pretty bought in.
right. And there's, your handful of education buildings. But then there's the Bullet Center's a 6-story office building, and there's a winery, and there's a bunch of, non-educational spaces as well. So we're trying to, spread the number of building types. Yeah, we hope to see you at the conference.
Great. Well, thanks, Susan.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll get to more questions here in a bit. Craig, you want to do a similar click down on well building and the well building standard?
Sure thing. Deborah, I noticed your hand was raised. Did you have something you wanted to say?
It was, I couldn't figure out how do you actually raise your hand on this thing. So I just raised my hand. I do just have a question. I wonder if each panelist might address this, and Susan, if you don't mind just quickly talking about this, can an architect be accredited with ILFI, and is there any specific reason to do so? Or is it better to, the focus is on the certification, it's not so much about your own credentials?
I think ultimately one of the team members, if you're going for a living building, one of your team members needs to be an LFA. So is that what you mean?
Yeah, and what does it mean to be one? How does one become one?
Yeah, it's the certain number of credits, and it's every 2 years that you need to renew. I just finished mine just like a year ago. So, it's just
exam. You took an exam, or what is it?
It's pretty well. So when you attend like the conference, you get a bunch of credits. It's you take the course and you do the 10-question quiz. It's no different than any other. It's just the topics are different. So it goes really through pedal by pedal, imperative by imperative. And it's a great cross section. Last year to renew, I had to, they had this group of, it was their top 15 presentations from all the conferences, so I really kind of, it was an efficient way to get the top tier of information very fast.
Got it. So it's kind of like continuing education. You just need to stay on top of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And maybe if, as everyone is talking, you could just touch on that briefly. Does an architect become certified in your specific area of expertise, and how does one do that?
Okay, thanks for that tee up. I'll jump right into that question first then. So well-accredited professional. I became a well AP probably about 2-3 years ago. It's an examination, 100 questions. And if you pass the examination, you are AP certified. It's really that simple. The examination is very rote, meaning it's memorization. You have to memorize the well book, basically, the guide. But the exam is not that challenging. I would suggest strongly that architects consider becoming well AP, because I think through my preparation in the examination, I learned a lot of things about the concepts at well approaches that I think that even should be best practices, even if you're not going for a well certification. They do a lot of things within their concepts that make sense. They're logical, and we're starting to think about buildings a little bit differently as a result. Once you're AP, you have to do hours with them, no different than LEED. Most of you are familiar with the LEED process. But Well is very flexible on the hours they accept. They accept pretty much anything. So I mentioned I manage multiple certifications and I have CEUs literally everywhere, but I'm able to cross-reference them and use them. So if we're speaking like this, we can use them. CEUs are very easy to maintain. As architects, you can use most of your AIA CEUs with the Well support. Well faculty is a little different. That is, you have to be recommended, and then they have to review your credentials, and then you become approved. And we'll meet with that group probably once a year and just talk about different things. Then you can have the ability to join a couple of their breakout groups for future planning and things like that. So with that said, this project you're looking at here is the Highland Sports Complex. It's a new construction, started about 2.5 years ago, finished about a year ago. It is the first Well Building certified project in West Virginia. And it is a football field under roof, a football field outside, and 8 basketball courts. And they host large events for community-based teams, high school teams, pretty much anyone. Their capacity in here really is remarkable, and they built a state-of-the-art center. We participate in this project doing a lot of support, building their OPR, sustainability support, and then we did the modeling on this project. And the owner, in conversations with the Discovery Shred and the OPR, recognized that they have an environment that you've got young kids, young athletes pushing themselves to limits in, and they wanted to make sure they provided the healthiest building they could. They're also using that to market it because it is true. And we have a robust measurement verification system in this building. This is Reset Air. It has smart technology on every operational technology. So they're collecting data as well, which is really great. As far as the Well building, I would suggest anyone interested in pursuing Well building, take a look at the 10 concepts as a beginner and look at the prerequisites. They're no joke. Getting to those prerequisites is not easy, and you really have to have the whole team involved. This is going to be led by the architect for sure, because the check sheet is rigorous, but the mechanical MEPs, your mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers, they're going to be involved in this process, and you need their support to execute against the Well building standard. The other lookout for this is these guys have a pretty rigorous testing and certification program. It took us probably 5 to 6 months to get fully certified once the building was completed, once construction was completed. And we started early, but it just took us that long. We did this project at a time where they were transitioning from a coach strategy for support to more of an online strategy. That was a bit frustrating, getting answers. I believe it's gotten better. And I believe that if you go into that now, it will be much easier than what we experienced going through this the last 1.5 years with Well building. Was a little bit frustrating, and everything took a little bit longer than expected. So that is the Highland Sports Complex.
Right. So in terms of the 10 concepts, can you give people an idea of your thoughts in terms of which are the ones that are, you know, if you're going to test a project or fit with some of these concepts and the prerequisites within those concepts, which are the ones that you would say, go to these first because they're usually the most difficult?
That really is going to be a job specific question, whether or not it's an existing retrofit or if it's new construction. What type of building it is really going to dictate how I answer that questions. But as far as a couple lookouts, light is definitely challenging. Sound is challenging to get at. Water as well is going to be challenged. But those are the ones.
Even though there's one precondition in sound, it's one of those that could trip a lot of teams up.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
But if you do it early and the engineers are aligned to this, it's not overwhelming. It's a little bit pricey. The testing is a little bit more rigorous than anticipated, but with the right support from the architects and the engineers, Well building is achievable for sure.
Great, thank you.
I have
Yes,
one more
Deborah.
question,
Yeah,
sorry,
go
that I
ahead.
hope everyone can address. Would you mind just talking briefly about project type and what, so I know Well is specifically suited to some project types a little bit more than others. Is that true also for living building, passive house, Fitwel, et cetera?
Susan, do you want to take the first crack for a living building on that?
You're on mute, Susan.
Can you repeat? I'm sorry. What was
Just,
the,
just project type, you know, some of these credentials are more suited to some project types than others. So if you could just kind of talk.
yeah, yeah, I was, well, there's, you know, a lot of homes, a lot of educational outbuildings, but like I mentioned earlier, there's the office building, there's like a shopping mall in Australia. There's a the Etsy headquarters is also living building certified, pedal certified, I think. But there's a range, and they're really striving for variety. So,
Thanks, Susan.
Yeah.
As far as well building is concerned, because of its cost structure and its approach to design, it's really going to be seen a lot more in the MUSH type market, municipality, university, schools, and hospitals, larger type buildings. But remember that well building is built around people, right? Their focus is on people. So any environment like a school or like a hospital is definitely going to be more appropriate for a well building approach. Commercial office buildings as well, but those other environments where you have people that are either young or they're in a hospital and they have immunocompromised conditions, that's going to be much more suitable for a well building approach.
Okay, let's flip over to Matthew Balke on Fitwel.
Yes, thank you. So, well, to kind of continue this topic, and this slide that we have up is perfect for this, because Fitwel has been one of the standards that has been very aggressive about trying to tailor itself to every building typology under the sun. It really started out in office buildings. It started out with the General Services Administration needed a way to measure their own portfolio of federal buildings. And once they had developed that, kind of a research-based approach that they pulled together, they realized there was value in that in the market. There was, you know, they had something there that they felt there was demand for, and that it could be applicable well beyond just their federal properties. And so they partnered with the Center for Active Design as the kind of private sector implementer of that, and that's what became the Fitwel standard. And so since they've started that, they have branched out from the kind of the single tenant building and multi-tenant building, which were the essentially commercial office space standards, to include now commercial interiors, retail, multifamily residential, senior housing is, I think, the newest, and they continue to innovate and add more betas as time goes on. And then the other part in the kind of bottom center of the slide is one that we're very excited about here at Torty Galveston, is the community and commercial site certifications. So this actually is starting to go beyond an individual building. This is more kind of the health equivalent of a lead for neighborhoods kind of approach, where you're looking at a larger site. And this is something we have in addition to our multifamily residential and our mixed use, we have a pretty robust planning practice going on here at Torty Galveston. And this has certainly been something that our clients have been interested in tackling it from the community approach. And Well has this as well now. They have a community beta as well. But the trouble you run into with Well, as with the standard, it's this question of rigor versus approachability. There are prerequisites, and one of the prerequisites for the Well community is that you have Well certified buildings within that community. So of course, getting the overall design under a Well neighborhood umbrella would be dependent upon going through individual building certifications. In Fitwel, everything is elective. And so you have obviously the opportunity to get points for having Fitwel certified buildings within your Fitwel neighborhood, your community, or your commercial park, but you're not required to. And so what that allows us to do is actually offer that to clients as a first step. Even in the design phase, we're doing the master planning. We haven't even gotten to the architecture. We don't know necessarily what the buildings are going to look like. We're not even sure we're going to be the architects designing them. but we can set you up with a community that is planned around health at the outset. And that sets the bar, the benchmark, that then as you go down the road and actually implement the buildings, you've already got a jump start on that. Because as was mentioned earlier, a lot of the focus in Fitwel is really from the public health angle. It's about active design. It's about getting people out and moving around and interacting between spaces and buildings and destinations. Walkability is very important. And so having a community that already implements that means that every building you plop down in there already has a leg up on meeting any health standard that you would try to apply for.
Let me ask you a question, Matthew, as you've tackled your Fitwel projects, other than community, where you can build in a lot of amenities when you look at a community and community planning, for the rest of the building types, does it help to be in an urban versus a suburban or rural?
It's a mixed bag. There are some things that are definitely helped by that. In the case of our office, for instance, as commercial interior, we are obviously very much advantaged by our location, close to a metro stop, high walk score, all of that. But there are trade-offs. You can be in a suburban or rural location that has a lot of natural amenities and walking trails and that kind of thing, which also can garner you a lot of points. Where we are here in an urban environment hemmed in, you don't necessarily have some of those opportunities. The other issue you can run into in urban areas, particularly disadvantaged urban areas, which we do a lot of with our affordable housing work, is that you might find yourself in a food desert. So even though it's a very built up area and very walkable, there's not a lot you would want to walk to. And that can be a problem for some. So, we take a very holistic approach to, when we come into a project, we want to make sure that we are affecting all of the levers that we can influence to make it the best possible place for residents.
That's great. Thank you. And I know you wanted to talk about becoming an ambassador.
Yes, and that is exactly right. We have this course. It's really quite simple. It is by far, I think, the most approachable professional credential you can look for out of this batch of different standards. And so I would strongly recommend everyone, if you're looking for a gateway drug into becoming a accredited professional in a whole bunch of standards, this is the one to start with. And they are actually running a promotion right now, a back to school promo code. So if you go to that link right there on the slide, and maybe Beth can drop it in the chat for everyone, there's currently a 25% off. I think it's normally $300. And it's currently 25% off through, I think, this Friday or something if you sign up. So there's a training pre-recorded video, and there's also this guidebook PDF that runs through the training, and then there's an online quiz associated with it. And actually, as I'm looking here at the document I have in front of me, it's actually also accredited for a 1 hour of your continuing ed credit. So just by taking the course, you are also getting continuing ed. So another advantage there. And then here on screen, we have this case study. Fitwel has been very helpful in producing documentation of these different project case studies for all the different project types that they cover. So this happens to be the multifamily residential one, but you can find ones for office. You can find them for this senior living and the commercial interior across the gamut. They have these case studies put together. The reason I selected this one, the Pearl, is because it's actually right here in our backyard in Silver Spring, Maryland, just across from the Giant in downtown Silver Spring. And I'm not sure recently, but I know a few years ago, pre-COVID, we had the opportunity to do a tour of that building with ULI. So they do on occasion sponsor some things. Tower companies, of course, a local REIT, and they're very much very proud of what they've accomplished there and their track record on sustainability, and they're happy to discuss it with you if you have any questions. But it has a number of exciting features that were really designed, it's very interesting. This was the first multifamily residential building in the world to receive Fitwel certification. And it was actually under construction when Fitwel released the beta multifamily residential standard. So they were already underway. They had set LEED Gold as their goal, but they were doing some innovative things in this building that went kind of above and beyond LEED Gold for a sort of ideological reasons. A very savvy owner that wanted to make this sort of the beginning of a redevelopment of a larger series of buildings, and they wanted this to be the showcase and really set that bar high. And when the standard came out, they looked at it and they said, "This is perfect. We're doing all this stuff, and this is really recognizing what we're setting out to accomplish here." So that's what kind of the
That's
backstory on the Pearl.
That's great. Thanks, Matthew.
Mhm.
I'm going to flip over to Matt Fine and talk about passive house. Jack McLaurin has a really great question in the chat. Jack, I want you to know that I see it. I'm going to let the last two presenters get through their materials, and then I think it's a great first question for our entire panel. So Matt, if you want to take over on passive house and go a click deeper on passive house.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And Jack, thanks for your question. And so my response to that is completely, it applies to dense housing, where in essence, you share energy with your neighbors, and that contributes to a more cost-effective envelope and a simpler design, frankly. We don't need to reach for very, very high R values for the building envelope when there's shared walls, when there's free heat, as we say, through the plug loads and the occupant loads. So townhouse applications work very well, even if you're on the end unit, even if you're on the top floor. And multifamily applies very well. Originally the standard was not derived, kind of thinking about this conglomerate building, and so they found that internal gains was kind of the challenge in terms of the heat generated from electrical equipment and occupant loads. Quite frankly, it demanded more cooling than typically would be needed, say, for a single family home. But it's very easy to go down rabbit holes with this standard in terms of kind of the detail and the applicability. But to me, that's kind of the beauty of it. When I was trained in passive house, it really opened my eyes. It was like what you didn't learn in architecture school, or what you fell asleep through, really kind of was hit over your head in the training in terms of mechanical design and true integration of systems between the envelope and the systems. Passive house, inherently, the systems are small sized, and so part of that, they become simple. The add-on, or let's just say the thing that a code built house wouldn't require, is energy recovery ventilation, and that is triggered by supreme air tightness for the building. So if you're closing off all the holes for a building, you have to bring it in somehow for fresh air, and to keep it healthy and filtered air for their residents. Just to kind of hit on Deborah's questions, kind of the easy ones. So an architect is not required to be a certified passive house consultant. You do need to have a CPHC on a project to be certified. And so they are basically a liaison with the certifying body, either PHIUS or PHI. And the architect, I would if you take nothing else from my presentation, it is that architects need to learn the principles of passive house. Whether you go through the actual certification, take the test, that's a thing in itself. But basically, it's basic building science that I think, at least I have a strong opinion about the welfare part of what architects do, and how responsible we are for controlling the energy that our buildings use. And so the certification is pretty rigorous. You really have to, they give you formulas to work out psi values for glass unit installations. Some of those things you'll never use again, but it's boot camp, or it's a form of hazing in essence, in terms of what the commitment you have for that standard, or the building sciences. Project type we kind of touched on with Jack's question. The case study that we have here in front of us it's this kind of the second phase of work that our firm is doing. We first started with a modular passive house in Prince George's County, specifically, Fairmount Heights. And that was delivered in a modular build. And it was basically done that way to try to lower the costs of construction, and to also control the quality. So passive house equals quality, period, in terms of construction, detailing, and integrity, if you will.
Matt, how do you
So-
talk to clients about passive house? Because we often hear two things, right? We hear one, it's just for houses, which you kind of addressed, but that is the one everybody hears first. And the second one is it's just too expensive. It costs too much. How do you handle that?
It's, ROI it's a hard one to justify this. Really, you need an owner and a development team who has got a mission, to either set a standard for the buildings that they build, or to definitely achieve high quality indoor air quality and health. The affordability, the cost curve has come down because it's more recognized. There's more builders who have experience doing this, and we used to say 10% of a premium. I would say, there's variables, there's scale, and of course there's whether the team is experienced, but I think we can peel back that to around 5% for projects.
That's great. I will say that the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency did a study that showed over a period of 3 years, they had incentivized multifamily developers to certify passive house. And the more often they did it, the better it got, to the point where it was, after 3 years, teams were at parity in terms of cost of construction. If I can find it before we hang up, I'll try to drop it in the chat if I can find the link to that.
Yeah, Pennsylvania, their QAP, for affordable housing, 2015, I think, was the pilot year. And, it was kind of make or break for them. But after 1 or 2 years, they saw no reason why to take it out of their QAP for bonus points. And other states have adopted that in terms of either giving bonus points or giving kind of portfolio points for, let's just say, the next QAP. So there are incentives for multifamily.
That's great. Thank you. We'll get to some other questions here in a minute, but Craig, why don't you round out the click deeper on Reset Air? I would imagine it's the one that people are the least aware of. So I did a little bit of an overview, but maybe you can bring it to life.
Thanks, Beth. Me again, I'm back. So let's talk Reset Air. What we like most about Reset Air is Reset Air is a sustainable certification program that is really not Reset Air and not them. Like when you go into these sustainable certification programs, you're probably thinking like, I'm going to do one, maybe two, I'm going to do LEED or WELL, or I'm going to do living building or WELL, or Fitwel or something else. Reset Air is a program that embeds very well into those other sustainable certification programs. Well building, for example, if you're doing Reset Air, you're getting pretty much 85% of the points in the air concept. And similarly, it has the same relationship with other sustainable certification programs. So it embeds really, really well. It's more than crosswalks. We all heard of crosswalks. Crosswalks are able to take two programs and look for the similarities so we can kill two birds with one stone. Reset Air is really more than crosswalks. It's actually embedded. So Reset Air, as Beth described, is an air quality continuous monitoring program. And the projects that I'm showing you here are all Reset Air certified. So Deborah, to your question on what building type, Reset Air came into the world with commercial office buildings. That's what their focus was. These buildings here are all topologies that Reset Air wrote with us to make sure that these programs could be used. So sports complex, first one, we wrote that topology. Multifamily, we wrote that topology, and then cathedral, we wrote that one. So that's what the Reset Air program is. In terms of who should be certified as an AP, it's a course. It's 8 hours, 1 day, and then an examination. If you take the course, you're not going to fail the examination. You're going to pass. I would suggest anyone who is interested in air quality and its impacts on people and building occupants should go through the certification. So architects or MEPs, it's an easy pickup, and the value is far greater than the demand to basically go through it, in my opinion. Reset Air is really two programs. So they have commercial interiors, and then they have core and shell. For core and shell, there's an equation that goes about how do I calculate the air and basically locate my monitors. So the core and shell requires you to have pretty much on these buildings, one outdoor air quality station and one induct sensor. Couple $1,000s each for those, and that's it. And if you do those right, you're going to be Reset Air certified. The commercial interiors requires you to deploy indoor air quality monitors that monitor the 6 parameters of air that Beth had shown on the slide earlier. And that calculation is for partial certification, you're going to cover 30% of the building occupants. And for full Reset Air certification, you're going to cover 80% of the building occupants. These 3 projects here are all full certified. And I can tell you on Highlands, I think we installed 8 indoor air quality monitors. On the multifamily project, there's 171 living units. So we first targeted 20, and then we figured out the value for that is really not that expensive. So the owner, working with their business development people, realized the upside on this, right? These living units are going to become that much more attractive to occupants. So they ended up doing a full deployment of indoor air quality sensors for all the units. The cathedral, that has, I believe, 6 indoor air quality sensors. So it's not hard to do. It's an inexpensive program to go through the certification, and the support on it is relatively easy. So we are Reset Air AP'd. We're a Reset Air auditor in the United States. We go audit projects, and we are also a Reset Air data accredited provider. That was the technology I mentioned earlier in my presentation that we developed to connect simulation to trended data. We needed to have the trended data platform. That platform is connected to Reset Air, and it's authorized as an accredited data provider as well. And I believe I answered all those questions. Oh, for the purposes of, I believe it is Jack's question, Reset Air, we are now using it. We're doing an eco village project, which is highly aspirational, and we wanted to get some feedback on those buildings. So they're passive house. So we only need an electric meter, a water meter, which are inexpensive for houses, and we need one IAQ sensor in the house. So we wrote another topology for single family with Reset Air, and we're able to deploy them in the eco village. It's a community of 35 homes that are basically zero energy. So you can be used, Reset Air can absolutely be used in single family as well.
That's great. So I'm going to transition back to our panel, and I'm going to go also back to Jack's question. and give everybody a chance to talk about that. Susan, I would imagine that in a, you know, high density single family home, like a 4-story urban townhome, I would bet you haven't seen a lot of those for living building challenge. Susan, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
We, for the competition 2015, we did, there were 15 townhouses that were 4-story, and that was in DC. And so, yeah, there's, you know, there's a variety of types. There's definitely, there's a building in London that is, I don't know how many units it is, but it's, yeah. So
Like a typical flat, like you might see in London, like a typical flat that might be a few stories with either one family in it or multifamily.
actually, no, this is much larger than that. There are some, you know, I just don't know all the projects. I'm sorry. So, yeah, I'll do a little more homework for the next time.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. I just wanted to get a flavor for Jack. Matt Fine, you already answered the question, which is spot on. Passive house is an absolute fit. Matthew Balky, how would you answer that?
Fitwel does not look so much at the single family market. I mean, as you said, it comes from a public health level. And so there's not really a compelling public health interest in, you know, the occupants of a single family house beyond, you know, how their healthcare costs are, you know, spread across. But and there's not really a particular reason why you would certify a single family house under Fitwel, given that the credits that would apply to it, or the electives that would apply to it, would essentially be things based around the location of the house and its adjacent amenities, and it wouldn't really change anything about how you go about building the house. In other words,
Yeah.
if you just limit it to those standards. So.
And Jack, I don't know if you want to come off mute, but you're more than welcome to. He clarified his question a little bit to say, he was talking more for a larger scale community in the 100 to 300 unit range, which might have more of a community wide impact.
Yeah, well, yes, in that case, that would absolutely be eligible under the neighborhood, the community certification. In that case, you wouldn't be certifying individual buildings, you would be certifying the overall neighborhood.
Right, and on that topic, there's Living Community Challenge, which is scaling up the living building challenge to a larger community, and it has its own set of imperatives.
That's
and
great.
I just put a project in the chat called Z Home, which was actually a precedent for the competition that we did a couple of years ago. So I don't know if that answers the question that we were trying to talk to, but
yeah, that's great. The next question in the chat is Walter's, and it says, can y'all talk about certification?
Hey, Beth.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I wanted to share a thought on well building with Jack's question.
Oh, okay, yeah, please.
So I just posted into the chat, well building last year launched a home advisory, home advisory to deal with single families. You don't normally see well building in a single family. They are more commonly in multifamily for sure, and then more in the commercial mush type market. So multifamily, yeah, well could be definitely considered, and it has experience in that market. Single family, not so much. Maybe use it for best practices. And as I said before, for Reset Air, yeah, Reset Air is in homes, Reset Air is in multifamily. It's very easy to deploy. Thanks, Beth.
No, that's great. Thank you for the ad, Craig. With regard to Walter's question, he's asking about certification management costs long-term. like what do you get when you certify in terms of amount of time, and what is the recertification and costs associated with recertification look like? Craig, do you want to start with well and recent air?
Yeah, that's a challenge for well. Well is expensive. So when you go through recertification, I think they're not requiring every 3 years to retest everything. What we try to do, because we're heavily into the data science market, is we're trying to connect well to technologies so that we don't have to bring boots on the ground into a building and do all the testing that's required from well. So if you can do that, then your cost for continuing that certification go down. If you can't, then you can expect that you're going to spend, on the buildings that we're talking about and the ones that I put in my presentation, you're going to spend probably $20,000 to $25,000 to do that. So it is challenging. And then reset air, its costs are nothing. You just have to make sure that you maintain the data accreditation. And as long as you maintain your data accreditation and you're sharing data back to reset air, real-time time series data back to reset air, then that cost for continuing is nominal.
That's great. Thanks.
Yeah, I can jump in on
Yeah, that's great.
Fitwel in
Thank you,
terms of
Matt.
so Fitwel is also a 3-year renewal cycle. It's because it's not as much of a performance-based focus. I think it's fairly easier lift on the soft costs in order to meet the threshold for recertification. The fees to recertify are essentially 80% of the initial. Well, they're 80% of what it would be to certify new under whatever is the prevailing fee structure at that time. These things change. It seems like
Look,
every couple of years they
Take
adjust.
a look at this, like on this slide we had, and I
Yep.
picked this up off of a source here, right? I don't remember. It was
Mm-hmm.
Gobi. I think Gobi had this costing here for basically a 50,000 square foot building. If the enrollment was 500,000 and the fee was 6, you're saying it would be 80% of this.
It would be 80% of that 6,000 to do the research. Yeah.
Got it.
And that's yes. And the Fitwel website is actually very upfront about
It
the
is,
costs.
yeah.
They have a very good explainer on that if you just go to the Fitwel site. So
That's great.
yeah.
Thank you,
they
Matt.
keep it
Matt,
up to date.
fine.
Sure. So let's just use a single family house as kind of our typical project. The cost, the percentage goes down. Let's just say it's a retrofit, that's more like 5% of construction cost. But when we're talking about $750,000 house and up, we're talking about 2%. That's inclusive of certification costs plus, any consultant fees, which is, in our opinion, kind of, a no-brainer in terms of what you get for that extra kind of, let's say, quality assurance. So I would say 15 to 20K for a single family house. And then, depending on the complexity of the project, obviously, if it's a multifamily, say a 50 unit or more, there's a little more complexity to it. So that out of the box costs would be a little bit more.
Okay, great. I'm going to, unless anybody has anything else to add, I'm going to flip over to go back on the whole support question. So one of you, I think maybe it was Craig, talked about the fact that well transitioned from one approach to the way they manage projects to another approach being more of a, you send a question to a general email box, and that's how you get support. I'm going to start with Susan because I think of all the standards, Susan, Living Building Challenge has a whole lot more support. Like if you do decide to tackle that standard, you have a lot of hands-on support, right?
Yeah, there's basically a committee that once you register, you start meeting with them weekly or whatever. That's how you learn everything about your project. It's a very sort of one-on-one experience. So yeah.
So you kind of have somebody, a human being that operates in the role of like a coach.
Kind of, yeah, it's more, I think it's more of a team, a collaboration, but yeah.
That's great. Matt, fine, with regard to PHIUS, there are a lot of different roles on a project. So how would you describe kind of the roles and then the support that you feel you get to make sure, you know, your project is as successful as possible?
Sure. So there's really only two roles for a PHIUS certified project. That's the CPHC, the consultant, and then there's the rater, the CPHR. And so there's a great network. You know, there's a database basically of certified consultants and raters and builders on the PHIUS website. A builder is not required necessarily, but definitely encouraged. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and if you have something like, let's say you come up against something on a building you've never seen before. How do you reach out to PHIUS? Like, are there people that you can get that kind of support from to say, gosh, I've never seen this before. How do I handle this?
Absolutely. It's a very close-knit community. Katrin Klingenberg, basically the CEO of the Institute, is an email away from us, and basically they have a tech committee, small group, probably 5 people. They've really dealt with kind of the ramping up of the volume of work. They really have a system worked out now, but they're very approachable through any CPHC.
But the CPHC is the pathway into that conversation.
Correct. Yes.
So Matthew Balke, so on Fitwel, what do you have available to you in terms of support? You're an ambassador, but what do you have in terms of if you have questions?
Yeah, so it's basically an online support. You send into an email. They generally get back to you pretty promptly. As an ambassador, we have a specific ambassador account that we can email to, that it's especially set aside to give us that. And once you're actually in a certification pipeline, then of course you get your reviewer assigned, and that's your contact. But
That's great. And then Craig, from a Reset Air standpoint, each project is really unique in terms of the deployment of the sensors. And what if you come up against something you're not familiar with? What do you do?
So the link that I provided for Reset Air, if you go to About Us and look at leadership, those are the 3 people that coordinate all of that work. So they have a director of projects, and we simply emailed the director of projects our question, and they literally get back to us in 24 hours. I've never had to wait longer than maybe 2 days max to ever get an answer back from them. And if the director of projects is busy, then the CEO or the president always emails too. So these guys are really hands-on. But the Reset Air standard itself, once you do 1 or 2, it's really kind of cookie cutter. You're using the same standard over and over and over again. So there's not a lot of times where we have those challenges unless we're looking at a new topology. And if we're looking at a new topology, then that's a little bit bigger of an effort with them to negotiate. But Reset Air has been outstanding.
And Matt Fine, do you have also PHI experience working with the international organization?
No, my training was done before they had the split. So in terms of the metrics of the standard, that's kind of where it evolved. I would categorize the two as PHIUS is more climate based, more North American climate based, and so they have more of a sliding scale with regard to their energy metrics. It's really not a choice that we made. It was kind of made for us. When you go for that education or that training, you're in a class, you become friends and resources for those around you, and so it's I wouldn't say that one metric or one certification is better than the next. It's just what you know. Obviously they're all pushing for the same goal in energy and carbon reduction.
For sure, we would totally agree with that. Craig, in terms of PHI and support, so can you contrast kind of the roles that exist on a project on the PHI side and you know, what kind of support is available to you, given it's an international organization?
Yeah, the process PHI uses for support is they work with a model that's called a certifier model. So we, as CPHDs, never have access directly to PHI. There's a buffer in between, and it's called the certifier. So if you look up the North American Certifier Circle, Beth, you could probably drop that link in there for me. So same model in terms of CPHD as to the C for PHIUS. They basically do the model work and they do the coordination and details for design and subcomponent modeling. They work with the certifier to get approval, pre-approval, any questions or answers, they go to the certifier, and the certifier interfaces with PHI and gets back to you. So that's pretty much their model. And Stephen Winter Associates and RDH and Peel are the three largest certifiers in North America, and also the Certifier Circle, which is a group of probably, I think, 7 or 8 certifiers. So that's the model they use.
That's great. That was super helpful, all of you, to give our attendees an idea of what they will get in terms of help and support if they choose to go down this route. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but in the last minute or two that we have, and I know I'm going to pitch it back to Deborah and her team to do any final wrap-ups, but if there are any other questions, please come off mute. If you have a specific project that you want to try to figure out what to do with, please come off mute and give our panelists a stumper.
And while everyone's doing that, Beth, I wonder if maybe we end with one of your earlier slides showing the broad overview of each of these. I thought it was really helpful to say that this is what, each of these has a specific focus area. So
Are we talking about the bar chart? Yeah.
Yeah, right. What their kind of specific focus is of each program. And I want to say, as we're waiting for questions, if any more questions are coming in, that we're following up with this presentation on in-depth discussions on each one of these. I think this has been a lot of information to take in and maybe a little overwhelming. So if you are interested in any one of them in particular, we're going to be having on a sort of a monthly basis, in-depth review of each of them. And we're starting with the well building standard. And that's actually in 2 weeks from now. So not monthly from today, but monthly in general. So in 2 weeks on September 29th, we're going to have a well building faculty architect give us an introduction to well. So you saw in an earlier slide that it goes through its number of what does well call it? And I'm well accredited, and I'm embarrassing, aren't I? The different group the concepts. Okay, they call them concepts. Yeah. So she'll go in depth into all of those concepts on September 29th. We're going to follow up then with Fitwel in October. And Matthew Balke is going to give us a presentation on that, and we'll kind of schedule the rest of them after that. So if you are interested in each one of those in particular, then stay tuned for information.
Great.
Okay.
Well, on behalf of the entire panel, thank you very much for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity to share our passions.
Yeah, so Beth, thank you so much for hosting this or for kind of moderating this for us and for putting that great slide deck together. Beth and Craig with Oros Group, these guys are a wealth of information, and we've had really great conversations so far talking about these all these different certifications and just like getting into the topic of green construction. So I think you could always reach out to them if you have any questions about any specific projects, and then each of the panelists, if you have specific questions for each.
And Deborah, I'll make sure you have the updated deck because we made a couple of tweaks at the end. I did with the
Okay.
panelists. So I'll make sure you guys have the updated deck, and please feel free to share that. It's got all the contact names of all the presenters today. So
Okay, and then
is
we
that-
will have this, we'll have this Zoom link also for everyone who attended, so you'll be able to, spend your free time watching it again if you like. So thank you so much for being a part of it. I just think we're heading towards a brighter future with each one of us.